Time to call the meeting to order. Welcome, councillors, staff, and press. Before I begin, I'd like to remind everyone to turn off their cell phones to a non-audible function. The clerk wants me to remind everybody, the committee and staff, to speak directly into their microphones for the benefit of our viewing public. The next thing that I need to talk about is pecuniary interest. Is anyone who has a pecuniary interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the agenda. There are no changes, so do we have anyone that would like to move the agenda as laid out? Councillor Black, all those in favor? That is carried. Welcome, Councillor Oliver. I'm hoping that you had a good vacation.
I'm glad to be back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We have Judy Ann McCauley, the camera volunteer today, so thank her very much for all that she does. Moving on, I guess we're going to move right to staff reports. Award of contract PWE 1732 Church Street and West Mill Street, Delhi Reconstruction Budget Amendment. Lee?
Through the chairman to council, the report before you is for the reconstruction on Church Street West and Mill Street in Delhi. This report is being brought forward in accordance with the purchasing policy. We had 5 companies pick up the tender, 2 of which submitted bids. We have brought it forward. It does require a budget amendment in approximately $120,000, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Black.
I know last council meeting we had some money that was sort of found money because we had a project that was under budget. So now this time, this one's over budget. So is that why, the question through you to Lee, I know we were ready to start paving all of Norfolk County with that little extra money that we had, but I know you were a little bit reticent in doing that, saying that, well, let me think about it. So is this the time that we should be thinking about it?
Lee?
Through the chairman to council, per council's instructions with respect to the asphalt repaving contract, we are in the process of speaking with the contractor, in this case Dufferin, to see if they were going to be able to do some additional paving for some of that money. One of my reasons that I was hesitant is because as the tendering process proceeds, we do have some projects that are over and that are under. Those are 2 very fundamentally different projects, though, in the sense that this project in Delhi incorporates a lot of underground work as well. So some of this cannot be funded. The additional money cannot be funded through those sources because this is water and wastewater, and as you know, water and wastewater is rate funded and must come from the rate base and not from the tax base.
Okay, thank you. And further to that, I think one councillor maybe a year or so ago asked for kind of a consolidated list of projects that shows which ones were under and which ones were over, like after the year was done, and just to show like were we over or were we under in total. So will you be bringing back a report like that? Just to show us that in the end, after considering the whole year, where are we at? And I think in the past we were in pretty good shape, I think.
Through the chairman to council, yes, we will be. Typically, we would bring that either in July or in September back to council to sort of give you guys an idea of our current status with respect to that. I will remind council that, as our treasurer frequently likes to say, much of this money is actually being funded from the reserve, which is in a deficit situation. So when we don't spend the money, we're not borrowing the money to not spend the money. So just to remind council of that as well. But yes, we will in fact be bringing back the report that sort of summarizes all of our capital projects for the year and whether or not, generally speaking, we were over or under with our capital
I
estimates.
think all of council and maybe everybody out there listening knows that we're in the red on our road reserve account.
Councillor Columbus.
Mr. Chairman, without hesitation, I'm going to move that recommendation as printed. And I just want to comment, this is a fairly narrow street, the Mill Street part of it, and it has no curbs or gutters. There's a washout that occurs from time to time next to Big Creek, so the curbs and gutters will help direct the water. But Lee, the one question I have is apparently there's some utilities under the sidewalk over there, and I guess I've had a couple calls from property owners and staff is meeting. Is that right, to have the sidewalk or some issue with the sidewalk, I guess?
Through the chairman to council, the issue with the sidewalk is the current placement, and once Mill Street, there is no issue with the sidewalk on Church Street, the issue is with sidewalk on Mill Street.
Right.
So the existing sidewalk on Mill Street only goes partially down Mill Street. It doesn't fully connect through the intersection at Church Street, et cetera. As a result of the engineering review, what we will be doing in this situation, and also Mill Street is also a narrower right-of-way than we're used to, and as a result, there's not sufficient room to put a sidewalk back in that area. So we're going to be speaking with the residents. What we're actually looking at doing is implementing a three-way stop at Church and Mill Street, because as it stands right now, it's on a bend, there isn't sufficient sight distances, it causes some traffic concerns. So we're going to be doing a little bit of reconstruction in that intersection to make it a three-way stop for the safety of the traveling public. As well, we are going to bring a walkway from Church Street through the museum property to get out to the sidewalk on Highway 3, so that pedestrians won't be directed to go up Mill Street, because we can't install a sidewalk in a satisfactory location based on the existing road structure.
Okay, so just this first time I heard this, so you're telling us that you're not putting the sidewalk in where it is right now?
That is correct.
Okay, that's perfect. That'll make everybody happy. Thank you.
We're going to use the county property that we own in the area. The majority of people walking in that area are looking to get out to the highway, to get out to Highway 3, to the sidewalk out there, to go to the splash pad and all of that sort of stuff. So we're going to direct them through the county-owned property, which is a safer method for the pedestrians to be walking through there.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Public Works, I noticed that the water and the wastewater side of these projects, the one was under budget considerably and the other one was a bit over budget, but overall it works out to be a $20,000 savings for the water and wastewater. Now, since that's funded by the ratepayers, that stays with the ratepayers and doesn't get combined in the books, is that correct?
Sorry, that is correct.
So then overall the roads was the one that takes the hit at $137,000?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Further? If not, Councillor Columbus has moved that staff report PW 17-33, award of contract PWE 17-32, Church Street West, Mill Street, Delhi reconstruction be received as information, and that a bylaw be prepared authorizing the mayor and clerk manager of council services to execute a contract with the firm of R.F. Almos Company Limited for contract PWE 17-32 in the amount of $923,010.44, excluding taxes. And further, that the overall approved 2017 capital budget for the Church Street West and Mill Street Road reconstruction project be increased from $875,000 to $992,000 and funded as outlined within the report. All those in favor? That is carried. Moving on to staff report HS 17-8, Home for Good Funding Program. Marlene.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to ask Heidi to present the report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to members of council. My apologies. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to members of council. The purpose of this report is to let council know of a new funding opportunity that we have for the creation of affordable supportive housing through the Ministry of Housing, and to seek council's permission to be exempted from the purchasing policy in order to allow staff to respond to the ministry's expression of interest by the deadline of May 19th. On March 27, 2017, the Ministry of Housing announced the Home for Good program. This program will provide $75 million over the next 2 years to consolidated municipal services managers across the province to create affordable housing with supports for vulnerable people. These funds are to be utilized for operating purposes, which includes housing allowances and rent supplements, which are affordability payments to tenants who are living in market rent that they cannot afford, portable housing benefits, and supports for housing stability and homelessness prevention. That would normally be through the use of paid staff. The funds will be allocated by the ministry over the next 2 years through an expression of interest process and will then become annualized, of course, as all of our funding is subject to provincial budgets. In addition to the operating funding, capital funding is also available for the construction of new units. So projects can apply for both capital funding and operating funding in order to create a new program, or projects can apply for operating funding only to expand an existing program. The Social Housing Division, as the CMSM, would like to work with our supportive housing partners in order to respond to the expression of interest so that we can hopefully gain funding to create new housing in Haldimand and Norfolk counties. The guidelines for the Home for Good program state that CMSMs must use public procurement processes in order to identify projects. And for us, this would mean the use of a request for proposal process. The deadline to respond to the Home for Good expression of interest is May 19th, as I stated earlier, and in consultation with Norfolk County purchasing staff and our colleagues in Haldimand, staff all agree that it would be impossible for us to write an RFP, issue an RFP, and evaluate an RFP between now and May 19th. And so for that reason, staff are respectfully requesting an exemption to the purchasing policy. How we would identify projects is that Tricia Givens and I have been meeting with our supportive housing partners in the community that are listed on page 2 and page 3 of the report in order to let them know of the Home for Good program and the funding that could be available. Interested partners will be submitting projects to the Social Housing Division by this Friday, May the 5th, which gives staff 2 weeks to review all of the projects and to determine which ones meet the eligibility criteria as outlined in the Home for Good guidelines. We have assured all of our partners that any projects that meet the eligibility guidelines, we will then submit to the Ministry of Housing for consideration. The Home for Good program only has one expression of interest intake. However, we can submit multiple projects under that one expression of interest. So at the staff level, we will not be shortlisting projects. We will put forward all eligible projects, and then when the ministry makes a decision about which projects they will fund, staff will come back to council with a subsequent report in order to approve the projects, accept the funding, and enter into the necessary agreements. It really is not very often that this type of funding opportunity comes available for both new capital funding and operating funding, and so staff would really like to be able to take advantage of this opportunity. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Luke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Heidi. Good to see you, and thank you for this. A couple of questions. The first one through the chair is, and I ask this respectfully, but it bothers me the timeline here. I note that this was announced on March 27th, which is about 5 weeks ago, and yet now we're within 2.5 weeks of getting in proposal. And Mr. Chair, I ask, okay, well, that's my first question. Were we late getting it here, or was it just we didn't get it from the province in time?
Mr. Chair, through you to Mayor Luke, as soon as we were made aware on March 27th of the funding opportunity, staff put together this report, and then with as with all of our reports coming from the CMSM, they need to go through the review process from staff at both Norfolk County and Haldimand, and then go to our Health and Social Services Advisory Committee before coming to Norfolk Council as the CMSM. So this report, we found out about the funding on March 27th. It went to the April Advisory Committee meeting, which was our first available meeting, and then came to the first available CIC meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is a fair answer, and it sounds like it's our red tape that has put us under the gun here and not the provinces, so they'll accept that. The other question I have, and I guess I would say, Mr. Chair, when I read this and I looked at 75 million over 2 years, which is roughly 37 million a year for the province, knowing the need, my reaction to this when I read it was, I'm not going to hold my breath. I hope I'm proven wrong. Through the chair, Heidi, capital and operating, I sense that it's just wide open for the providers here, and there's 4 categories, which I agree with all of them. That's what we need to address. But what are your thoughts here with our chances of success here in coming up with a project that will no doubt be in competition, Mr. Chair, with a lot of other projects, and just a general comment, if you would, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, through you to Mayor Luke. We are working under a very short timeline, and so staff have already been working with our partners in anticipation of this report coming to council. And all of our partners know that this is subject to council approval of an exemption to the purchasing policy. So we have already started the work behind the scenes to have our submission ready to go for May 19th. So I am confident that we will have projects that are going forward from Haldimand and Norfolk. We have heard that potentially not all 47 CMSMs and Northern DSABs, which is the District Social Services Administration Boards, will be able to meet that tight deadline. So there is potential that we are not going to be competing against all 47. We also have very good supportive housing providers who, in our initial conversations with them, have got some wonderful projects and some very creative projects that would make a world of difference in our community. So I'm really hopeful that we're going to be approved for some funding, and I'm really not, from the staff perspective, we are determined to try. We're not prepared to we would not recommend saying that it's a short timeline and we're going to be competing with everyone else, so the funding will likely go to the larger urban centers. From my experience, the ministry does its very best to spread the funding across the province and to make sure that small and rural municipalities are represented in the funding that they allocate, so I'm quite hopeful.
Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Heidi, for the report. I appreciate the strategy you've come up with to still try and make this a fair process, and not like an RFP necessarily, but you're inviting proposals from all potential service providers. So my only real question to you is, are staff then satisfied that that will meet the ministry's requirement for a public procurement process?
Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Oliver, it would be our position that Council's exemption, granting an exemption of the purchasing policy in accordance with our purchasing policy would be sufficient. That's what we will be putting forth to the ministry.
And I support doing that, but would you see any merit in also providing detail of what it is you are doing, which is to invite proposals from the social service housing community? So in a sense, that by and of itself is almost like an RFP.
Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Oliver, absolutely, we'll include that in our response.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Heidi, I'm just trying to remember, Mr. Chairman, through you, at the committee or advisory committee there, did we, I know Haldeman said that regarding the availability of property or housing for this program. I know Haldeman, did they not say they had facilities or places that would fit the program? More so than what I don't recall us having anything at the time when we discussed it, and I guess maybe you could jog my memory.
Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Brunton, two of our supportive housing providers, the two that were mentioned at the advisory committee were True Experience and Capabilities Support Services, which used to be Cheshire Independent Living. They are both currently operating supportive housing in the Haldimand County, Dunnville specifically, and it was shared by an advisory committee member that both have expressed interest in putting a project forward.
Okay, but are there any in Norfolk that pop up right away in your mind?
Mr. Chair, through you to Councillor Brunton, in our conversations with our partners that are based in Norfolk County, we have talked about both the potential for capital projects with operating dollars and projects that have operating dollars only. So I can't say at this point that I know for sure that a capital project is coming forward for Norfolk. But it could be that we create new affordable units in Norfolk or in Haldimand by providing those housing allowances and rent supplements to tenants so that they can go out into the community, rent an apartment of their choice in a neighborhood of their choice, and we would, through this funding program, subsidize their rent in order to make it affordable. And then the proponent, whoever the support agency would be the ones who would be funded to provide the staff support to make sure that that tenant was able to stay stably housed.
Okay, but as far as new capital construction, if I could use that word, that would be very difficult, would it not, with the timing involved?
Mr. Chair, through Councillor Brunton, that's correct. This is a very tight timeline, and the ministry guidelines for this program state that a project needs to be close to shovel ready. So there would need to be a property, it would need to have proper zoning or be in the process of obtaining proper zoning, and they would need to be prepared to start construction within 120 days of being granted the funding.
Well, I hope based on, I know the last report you provided us with there a while back in terms of needs, people out there that have this need, and I would hope that we can find some, I'll use the word definite benefit for Norfolk. I know Haldeman spoke highly of it when we had the advisory meeting there, but or the committee meeting, but I'm hoping Norfolk has some possibilities, I guess. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Black.
Well, I think maybe, Heidi, you've answered some of my questions. I was going to ask you, would this be something similar, or could it be something similar to what Indwell has accomplished down at Hamilton Hall?
Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Black, yes, absolutely. It could be something like that project.
Okay, well, I can tell you that I think that is a high priority for, I don't know about Dunnville, probably is, but for Norfolk County in this area, I think it is a high priority that not only are we providing housing at a subsidized rate, but providing assisted housing. And I think that is very important because there are a lot of people out there that require that special need, and they just sometimes they don't work out in a regular apartment because they don't have that assistance, and they end up getting evicted. And with the assistance, then they can live a more happy existence, and all the neighbors are happier, and everyone is just a lot happier with that situation. So it would be nice if we could see that. Would there be any consideration to the Norfolk Hotel in downtown Simcoe? At one time, Indwell was looking at that.
Mr. Chair, through to Councillor Black, I can't say at this point in time that property would be one of the properties that any of our potential partners are considering. But certainly when we are talking to our partners, we're talking about new construction. We're not only talking about from brand new construction from the ground up, but conversion of existing buildings. So our partners do know that conversion of existing buildings is a possibility.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay, is somebody prepared to move the recommendations, and I will read it. That staff report HS 17-08, Home for Good Funding Program, be received as information, and that council direct staff to submit an expression of interest to the Ministry of Housing for the Home for Good Funding programs, including all projects that staff determine fit the program eligibility criteria and are submitted in time to meet the May 19th deadline. And further, that council exempt this project from the quotation and tendering procedures for goods and services outlined in Section 4 of the Norfolk County Purchasing Policy EBS-02 for the reasons set out in staff report. Councillor Mayor Luke, you have moved. All those in favor? That is carried. Moving on to staff DSC 17-41, 5-year official plan review outstanding issues, recommendations report, retail marketing studies, and farm split parcels. Oh, Mary, you're taking that one, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have come before council today on 2 outstanding issues that were deferred in February when we talked about the final issues and options report. One had to do with retail market studies, and the second one had to do with the minimum agricultural farm parcel size when we're doing farm splits. So I'll let Matt take over to speak with you about the retail market studies, and then I'll come back to talk about the farm parcel size.
Okay, very good.
Through you, Mr. Chair. The retail, at the last meeting, one option that was considered was a countywide commercial study instead of requiring proponents of large retail developments to do their own retail impact studies and the peer review process that is associated with that. In considering that, some municipalities have taken that approach, but I'm not recommending it for Norfolk for a number of reasons. It's a costly process. There is, as I identified in the commercial study, a significant amount of commercial development proposed in the county already that would take up the needs for the 20-year planning period to 2036. And with the slow growth in the county, it is growing, but it's not a rapid growth rate. There really isn't that need at this point for a countywide strategy. I think as also in the official plan right now, there are a number of areas where market studies are, retail impact studies are required for further expansion of retail development. One would be Norfolk Mall, and there are several, there's the next property on the Queensway, and even the Dover Coast development in Port Dover requires retail market studies for any further expansion of the retail component. So it is something that's been in the planning process for some time, and the county is still reliant on it for further expansions in a number of cases. So it's important to retain those policies in the official plan. We are looking at a number of improvements to the retail market impact studies that addresses several of the weaknesses that I've identified. And these include requiring a countywide analysis of retail impacts. Most of the studies are for a much smaller market area than at the county-wide level, providing more complete information on the county's retail inventory and more transparency in the assumptions that are being made for future retail space needs, and better justifications for those assumptions. So if those are implemented, and if any retail market impact studies are done following those improved policies, the county would at a later date probably be at a better position to do its own strategy if it's needed. So it probably, I think it would be something that can be considered at the next time you do a 5-year review of the official plan, or if you decide at that time to do a new official plan. But right now, with the cost that's involved, I don't really think you would benefit from it. The study can become stale fairly quickly. It's based on population and growth assumptions made that are available at this time, and in 5-10 years down the road, they would be out of date, and you would have a stale study and really have not much to show for it. So I think that's basically it. I think it's the tact would really be to improve the retail markets study policies that are in the official plan at this time. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Ken, the next development, are we asking them for a market study?
Generally, market studies are required for large retail developments, and the official plan considers that to be anything over 3,000 square meters, which is about 33,000 square feet. If another proposal was to come in at that scale, or if you're to add more, redesignate lands for commercial purposes from another land use designation, you also have the option of requiring a retail market impact study.
But I'm asking, maybe you can't answer the question, but is the next development on the highway, are we asking for a retail study? Maybe Pam?
That's, I looked at that amendment, and it's in that amendment that the next phase requires a retail market impact study.
Okay, and then I assume we'll want a peer review of that? Is that going to happen also?
Through Councillor Brunton to Councillor, or to Councillor Brunton rather. Yes, you're correct. Matt's outlined correctly. There was for the next development, those peer reviews have already been done on the existing market retail. When the new phase comes in, it too will need a peer review.
Okay, and I guess my question on the small, and I don't know what the square footage or meterage is, on the one on the Queensway West, the new one out that way that's being proposed, a 30-unit condo type development. Is that sufficient to ask for a retail study?
Through you again, Councillor Brunton. No, that one is as of right permitted, so there are no official plan or zoning bylaw amendments needed. It's only going through the site plan application process.
Okay, and I guess looking at that, like I know, and I'm thinking back here, and maybe Mayor Luke can jog my memory, but when we did the Superstore, Zeller's area, and that, we got into the OMB and blah, 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 and all those studies, when we approved that, if I remember right, it was conditional upon the developer paying for all our costs at the time. Is that just something that we as council can ask for? If we, let's say a new development comes along that's sufficient size and we want it to be approved, even though maybe perhaps planning staff doesn't approve it, maybe we want the development. I can't recall how that all went, but I know the downtown opposed it at the time up there and we had a real argument, but the conditions were that they had to pay for it all. even though, even at the Ontario Municipal Board, all the costs associated with it. Is that something we as council have to implement at the time? It's really, how do I put it, in an agreement where we say, okay, yeah, you can go ahead, well, even if it goes to the Ontario Municipal Board, but you got to cover our costs.
To you, Councillor Breton, again, I think you're speaking about the next development specifically.
Well, I'll go ahead and use that one if you want.
That was a little different scenario, because when it had been appealed, the rights in which it had been appealed were not kind of technical matters. So the county did ask for costs at that point. That was a little different scenario than what normally happens.
Right.
Peer reviews are at the cost of the developer.
Right.
And that's part of the policies currently in the official plan.
But if we go to like an Ontario Municipal Board hearing and we ask, like there's a cost to defend our decision, whatever it might be, can we ask, that's really nothing to do with the official plan, it's really a decision this council makes at the time that if we're going to the Ontario Municipal Board that we want that developer to pay our costs to defend or whatever decision we make?
Again, to Councillor Breton, it would really depend on the scenario, but that is Council's choice along with Peter Tice's decision or discussions with Council.
Okay. And my last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I assume like Walmart had a retail market study done. Now, do you, I guess my question, if we're doing one for the next development and something else comes along, those studies, things can't change that much that we'd have to ask for that. You said in 5 years we should consider that as part of the official plan update if it happens in 5 years. But the way things are how much can one of those studies change? I realize things close or some things might open, but is there a significant amount of change there that will warrant doing another study? Is that a decision we can make?
The policies, in terms of a decision that you make, the policies in the official plan are that for large retail developments that you require the market study. For some smaller developments, such as a change to a commercial designation, that's an option that council has in the plan. They can decide to waive it if.
Okay.
But for the larger developments and in the shopping center designation, it's that waiving is not an option that I've seen. Studies do become stale. I think in a few years. I think the population forecasts, for example, that were done for the county in 2014 by the Hempson Corporation, which based on the 2011 census, to me is are basically stale already because of the 2016 census data is now available. So within 3 to 4 years, 5 years, that information can become stale, and population and population forecasting is crucial to retail market studies because the the expenditure calculations that are made are based on the market size, and that's basically population. Expenditure patterns can change as well, or shopping patterns can change. So I think the shelf life isn't that long. It's several years, but not much longer.
But again, you see that's a decision we can make to waive something like that, correct?
I said that for the smaller developments that are applying for a redesignation to commercial use. But in the shopping center designation, which is in the special policy area on the Queensway, it is not an option. And it is not an option for the expansion of, say, the Norfolk Mall, where it's a policy that's in the plan.
Thank you.
Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess further to the line of questioning where Councillor Brunton was getting at, like, if we're talking two different, I don't know, shopping plazas at the same time and they both have to do retail studies, I find that very redundant. If Next does one and it's good for a year or two, why make Walmart or Metro or whoever else wants to come in here do the exact same study? It's there, it's peer reviewed, there's a cost to it, which it didn't cost county. So why wouldn't you have like a stale date? If it's past 2 years, then you need a new one. But not for every single one that tries to come in here. I don't understand that.
Through Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if competing retail developments would share their retail market studies. They might, but I think I think of that situation arose and it's publicly available and they're I don't know. I think most large retail developments do their own retail market studies based on consultants that they're comfortable with and have experience with. So if they happen to have the same consultant, maybe that would work. But generally, that I haven't come across that in my experience. So. And the different consultants usually use somewhat different assumptions and techniques and that. So I'm not sure if that the information is all that shareable.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure that they do their own retail studies. It's part of their due diligence before they spend millions of dollars coming into a community. Why we're forcing them, I don't know. Now, when we went over this the last time, we talked about there's so much emphasis on the downtowns being recognized. And it's still in here. One of the things got removed, assessing the suitability of the downtown for the proposed development. But even item F, provides satisfactory justification for the assumptions on the tolerance for downtown and other commercial centers on any negative impact on reduced sales that may result from proposed development. So if Metro wants to come to Simcoe and crush Superstore, we're going to not allow it because it could have a negative impact on Superstore? That makes zero sense to me whatsoever. Competitive, better pricing, better for our residents. Why would we restrict that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, you may not restrict it, but at least you would know what the potential impact is, and you can judge whether that impact is satisfactory to you or not. Usually when a new retail development comes into a community, there is a negative impact. But the question is, how significant is it? And is it going to, what is the recovery period? Will the existing stores, which may be in the downtown, but may also be in one of the other communities or on the Queensway, existing developments there. How long is the recovery period? Will that recovery period be short or will it be long? Will it force that store or shopping center to close? I think that would be useful information to know when you're making the decision on new developments.
Well, if that's the case, why did Zellers fail? Surely we had a plan, the impact was there, Zellers rolled over and it sits there empty.
Yes, and I think from what I read of the retail market studies that were done at that time, it was shown that the Zellers store would take a significant hit with Walmart coming in. So, and that's what happened. So, it's one of the things we're looking at in the official plan review is allowing some alternative developments on as I say, residential development on some of those larger sites to give them another option as to how they can redevelop. Whether that, the Zeller's property is a candidate for that, I don't know, but it could be. So that's one of the things we're looking at.
Okay, will that be ready to go into the official plan, those options?
The residential option is in the draft official plan that is before council right now.
Okay, thank you. And in this, on item D, it says here, provide detailed floor space inventories for the county. So somebody wants to go into the Norfolk Mall, they're going to have to come into downtown Port Rowan and check on our vacancies there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be only required through a retail market study. If a store wanted to take up vacant space in the Norfolk Mall, they would not have to do a retail market study. It would only be for an expansion of what is permitted on that mall space today.
I'm speaking if they want to build a 34,000 square foot plaza in Tillsonburg or at the border, they would have to study Port Dover, Delhi, Simcoe, Port Rowan, Waterford.
Mr. Chair, that's the recommendation. Most of the market studies that I've seen have just focused on the Simcoe area, and I think the market area in the county is, for most of the, especially the larger developments, is larger, and I think it warrants analysis of the impact county-wide.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question through you to Pam. I want to go back to the next properties, the old airport property, as many call it. The first phase has had the market impact study done on it, correct?
Through you, Chair, to Mayor Luke, I believe the first two phases have had the impact study. I believe it's the third phase that's requested to happen in the future.
So a total of 3 phases when we're finished.
Correct, but
Two
you
are done,
are
yeah.
testing my memory.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Councilor Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the planners or the consultant, and I thought I remembered back when Walmart came to town that we actually limited, or somehow they limited the amount of space for which they could sell groceries. Was that the case? And that was through the peer review process. Can you comment on that?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Columbus, yes, you are correct. They have a limited square footage or meters for their retail produce, that sort of thing. I don't know the number off by hand.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. And to Matt, this the retail market studies and the peer review, how much weight does that hold if project application went to the OMB?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the market studies would have a significant weight at the Ontario Municipal Board. The impact of that development on existing development downtown or other commercial areas would be of significant interest to the board.
Okay, thank you. And my last question here, you mentioned about the slow growth rate in Norfolk. And I just wonder if the big super hub, the recreational complex that we all received so many emails about, if that came to town, do you think that our growth rate would significantly increase so that we could accommodate more of this retail space? That's a philosophical question. Would our population significantly increase like some of the emails suggest?
Through Mr. Chair, I'm not too familiar at all with that proposal, but it is important to regularly update your population forecasts for new developments and new trends. Norfolk may become attractive for retirement, empty nester type households who in certain areas along the coast or other communities. So the type of development that takes place in the county might have a bearing on its growth. So that that's something you would assess probably every 5 years.
Councillor Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you to Matt. And I guess my experience with these market studies, you mentioned that the area was basically around Simcoe, and I'm pretty sure that I've seen some of the studies in the past where they're drawn, and it's a boundary where they figure where is that boundary and how many people are in that boundary, and they would take into consideration Brantford and Tillsonburg. So and sometimes with their commercial development, if they're developing a lot of commerce, it starts to move our boundary inward. So then our area isn't quite as large. So is that the case? Like would they not sort of assess all of our borders around us and what they're doing as well as what we're doing to determine that line and the number of people in it?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, they determine the trade area boundary, and it is impacted by developments outside of the trade area, such as Brantford or Hamilton or London or Woodstock, whatever the community is. And there's always an assumption made as to how much spending takes place outside of the trade area. And that's normally done through surveys, where they actually phone households and get information on spending patterns. So that's part of the retail market survey or impact analysis approach, is to do those kind of surveys. Another way of doing those surveys is through license plate surveys at major shopping areas within town to see where people are coming from. There may also be people coming from outside of the trade area shopping in Simcoe as well. Tourists, cottagers, or generally live outside the community bringing money in. So it's kind of a two-way flow, but that survey analysis would provide some estimation of what that is.
Okay, and then you also mentioned that you take into consideration the population growth, but do you not also look at some of the StatsCan information about spending, like amount of spending and what's available to an individual, and that amount could go up and down from one survey to the next, could it not?
Yes, there's expenditure data from Stats Canada that is very detailed about the type of items that people are spending their money on. Normally that's not available at the Norfolk geographic level, but it is available provincially at least. So there are assumptions made based on the use of that data, and also how that's going to change over time. And so there's usually an increase or decrease in terms of expenditures pattern, and how much is spent on food and how much is spent on non-food type items, and that is projected over the forecast period.
Okay, and another question, the purpose, like I know a couple of the other councillors are questioning, why do we even need one of these studies? So I'm going to ask you, what is the purpose? Now, in my mind, the purpose, and correct me if I'm right or wrong, the purpose of doing a market study analysis is to ensure that existing commerce is not devastated, as we have seen in many, many downtowns, including Simcoe and Delhi, and even on the highway with Zellers. There's an burden of, or oversupply of commerce, and then it affects existing commerce. So in my mind, is that really fair to the existing people to put them out of business and have empty buildings and no taxes in lieu of creating brand new retail and leaving one area devastated? So is that not the purpose, is to protect and to balance that market?
I think you just provided a very good description of what the purpose of the impact studies are.
Okay, so you would agree with that, and is there
Yes.
anything you could add to it, or?
No, it's to measure the impact, and so that council, in making its decision, knows, has a good idea what that potential impact is, and it can decide whether it can live with it or it's too much to bear. And I think that's really what the purpose is.
Okay, and then lastly, I think you said that both residential, we have enough residential land designated as well as commercial land. Is that what you said, that in your report, right now we have enough commercial land designated throughout Norfolk County and all of the municipalities to see us through for the next, is it 20 years or?
Through Mr. Chair, yes, through the next 20 years to 2036, there's sufficient land for commercial development, residential development, and also industrial development.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask. We had a Walmart at the Norfolk Mall, and it wanted to have a grocery component, and it couldn't do it because of the impact it was going to have on the grocery stores in Tillsonburg. So what happens? Walmart moves to downtown, and they could have wiped out the other ones, but that wouldn't stop them, correct? Because they were within the town limits. Is that correct, and is that fair? Maybe you don't want to answer that, but my question on the end will be is, are you saying that we could never have a Walmart at the Norfolk Mall?
No, I wouldn't say that at all, Mr. Chair. The Norfolk Mall has a shopping center space available to it. It's in the policy, in the official plan. It's been agreed to by the town of Tillsonburg. The servicing is there for a certain amount of space. So if the existing store was to be reopened, that would not require a retail market impact study. It can happen. I think the policies, I stand corrected on this, but I think the policies in the plan